Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Self-Consciousness Podcast. I am your host, Jennifer Way. I hope you are hanging in there as we near the end of the summer here in the Northern Hemisphere. On today's show, I thought it would be fun and interesting to bring on a voice from the Southern Hemisphere. My friend from the other shore, Andreas Labuschagne. Yes, I pronounced it right. Andreas is a contemplative educator and counselor. And there's a whole bunch of stuff I can't pronounce. Pure Land, Chan, Sokpa, Chenpo practitioner. Please forgive me. Ugh, so disrespectful. Having studied and taught various forms of meditative practices, Andreas is based in Pretoria, South Africa. And today we talk about what it was like growing up there as a seeker of wisdom in multiple traditions, especially non-traditional traditions. So here my ADD cut us off like 3 times. Andreas's work can be found online through a search of his name. You can see how it's spelled below until his website is finalized, but you can email him in the meantime at middle.hand.mountain@gmail.com, and you can find him on Instagram at the handle I've included in the show notes. Thank you so much for choosing to spend the next hour or so with us. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Hi, Andreas.
Hi, how you doing?
Welcome to the Self-Consciousness Podcast.
Wonderful to be here.
Yeah.
And hello to your listeners. It's exciting.
Yes. So Andreas is my friend from the other shore. So talk to me a little bit about, tell the listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah. So I'm based in South Africa. I am South African. And professionally, I'm a contemplative educator. At least that's what I call myself. That's what I specialize in. I did my master's degree in philosophy of education and specialized in contemplative education. And that's still a fairly new field, being developed during the 70s in the States. I think Chogyam Trungpa was a big proponent of the contemplative education movement. So I base a lot of my practice on Chogyam Trungpa's vision of what contemplative education is. And it's basically the inclusion of contemplative practice and the vision of inspiring wisdom in learning or in understanding, and then the cultivation of culture. That's how I interpret it as culture, which is changing society towards an enlightened perspective through the arts, basically. And yeah, that's what I do. I'm lecturing. I'm a philosophy of education lecturer, amongst other things. And then, of course, I'm also a solitary wizard, which is a whole story in itself. And, I can imagine listeners just thinking, oh, goodness, another Harry Potter freak or some type of,
Don't be self-conscious here. Although this is the perfect place to be self-conscious.
Yeah, well, the podcast says it all, right? It's self-conscious.
So talk a little bit about what, in a nutshell, or not. I mean, we have a lot of time. There's no time limit. Contemplative education. Obviously, I'm pronouncing it differently.
Yeah, my accent.
Contemplative.
Contemplative.
Is that how you say it?
Contemplative. Well,
yeah, I feel like I say word. Contemplative. Yeah, same word.
So
what is that?
Yeah, it depends on the context. A project I'm currently working on, and I'm a bit apprehensive to put it out there because one of those rules of magic is don't speak what you have not put into tangibility yet. But it's focusing on maybe I can put it out there. Maybe it's kind of like an accountability title, so I can follow through with it. Okay. And I'm calling it Becoming Johnny Appleseeds, and it's focusing on a peripatetic, a wandering pedagogy of planting trees of contemplative practice. So the tree in this sense is both a metaphorical representation as well as a symbol of the community. So walking around different communities or different spaces and planting a hypothetical tree, as well as a physical tree of contemplative practice, means bringing people together as communities under the so-called tree, and then actually practicing certain contemplative practices. So your basic contemplative practices would be meditation, mindfulness, and you have a great variety of different sorts of specialized contemplative practices. The typical one would be the variety of yoga practices that you'd find, movement practices, activism, ecological activism, anything that settles the mind into a state of presence and intentional presence. And what I'm liking about this idea is that the tree is a significant symbol in African culture as a place of learning. And long before structures of learning, as you know, the brick and mortar school were built, a lot of learning took place under big trees, the elder trees. So if you search images on ancient and significant trees in Africa, you will find like a typical image that would come up is the baobab tree, which is also considered an elder tree, a tree that holds ancestral heritage. And that, in a sense, brings me to the intention to walk around and plant these trees is also to cultivate a wisdom ecology. And that is like returning our sensibility to being rooted in our state of wisdom through oral traditions, through just like being radically clear and honest with each other and ourselves.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then, of course, the third aspect would be to like weave these narratives together. A typical image of weaving in terms of artistic artifact would be like weaving baskets or weaving tapestries. And that, in a sense, is this building of a story and like recording our travels, you know, like it's almost like a mapping of where we're taking this route and how we're rhizomatically spreading a message of wisdom. Yeah. So that's that's what I'm putting out there. Yeah, and I mean, if it works like in a localized setting, it would be so cool to see this spread internationally.
Yeah.
Damn.
All right, I don't have any other response. Like, wow, that it just like, so let me just absorb that, like integrate it a little, because I've got so many thoughts that are but it's like I have so many thoughts, like just even the concept of weaving. I feel like I've seen that energetically, and I've experienced that energetically, and I was surprised that even sort of in those etheric realms that this concept of weaving is actually a very real thing, sort of existing in one dimension and kind of pulling your experience up to a higher dimension and then bringing it back down to the lower dimension, sort of like a weaving, if that makes sense. But I've seen that in visions before and things like that. So it's really, really interesting. That it's probably one of those sort of concepts or archetypes that's just you know, up out there and then has come down into the world in so many different ways, because it's just an essential thing, I think, for existence, this sort of weaving together. If there's many of us kind of coming through multiple perspectives and then building something stronger together, God, I sound like a commercial. Building it stronger together.
Mm.
So I do want you to go back to, if you
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
mind, the
We can
wizard
take a
thing, the
step back.
solitary wizard thing, because
Oh
I
yeah.
think our interests really meet. There's a lot of sort of esoteric and mystical traditions that you've studied sort of academically,
Mm.
but then there's all of these other things that you've kind of studied independently as well. Can you just talk a little bit about the wizardry?
Sure.
Yeah.
Um, Before I can get to the wizardry itself, I guess I need to step back into how I led myself into that type of becoming. And
Not a typical South African childhood,
no,
maybe.
it's I guess at a certain era in South African history would have been highly frowned upon. It was frowned upon because I was at some point in my high school career asked to leave school because I was just too out there, I guess. Like
Wow.
the look, I grew up during the 90s and 2000s. That was like my teens, 20s. And it was the 90s Satanic Panic had just like kind of fizzled out.
What is
Um,
that?
Look, during the 80s and 90s, there was this scare, satanic scare, and I think in the States, when Reagan was president, the Satanic Panic was like at high alert, and everyone was afraid of records that were reversed, played backwards, that had satanic messages
Oh
that was
yeah.
infiltrating the minds of the youth.
Okay. I remember that.
Yeah. All of that. I forget his name. Sisters of Mercy. Anyway,
Yeah.
so it was fairly global. We've had in South Africa, we had our own satanic panic, and it's really quite silly in a broader sense, where um, anything that represented any any deviation from the Christian the state Christian ethos was considered taboo and evil. So, like if you were into Dungeons and Dragons, Magic the Gathering, um, I mean, like even just comic books or any symbolism that could potentially reference this idea of the devil would be an abomination and basically being led into satanic practice. And South Africa also has a history of what they call witch doctor murders or muti murders. And this was wrongly associated with Satanism. Like everything was just thrown together in the same melting pot. Okay, so during my schooling, I had an interest in the occult, and that's where it started for me. I started reading up. When I found a book in the library, I kind of held onto it and explored what was inside this book. And it wasn't like any deep esoteric knowledge. I mean, this was like um, conversations about Madame Blavatsky, the Theosophical Society, um, spiritualism, psychic telekinesis, and so forth. So it's your generic kind of like parapsychology.
Yeah.
But I was intrigued and I was looking into it. But the way I was displaying my interest, I guess, kind of concerned the
What does that mean?
teachers.
Like how you were dressing or like
Look, we all wore uniforms at school, and we
oh,
all had
okay.
to. Yeah, no, it's South Africa still followed a formal system of education and required all students to wear certain uniforms. Still does actually, but there was a an expectation, a yeah, like an ethos, the state ethos of what almost a totalitarian ethos of
Mm-hmm.
what is expected of students. It's very functionalist in you're getting your education to serve a certain purpose in society. Yeah, so any bit of like alternative edge would have been cause for a raised brow.
Mm-hmm.
And look, I was into poetry and art, and the imagery that I conjured in my art, I think, upset certain people. So,
Yeah.
but I wasn't explicitly expelled from school. It was just an asking to rather leave. It's better for you to leave and find a place that is better suited to your person. So that's what led me to homeschooling. But that also led me into allowing me to explore my my interests a bit more. That said, I was still pretty much bound to the, let's call it, the family religiosity. And around 18 years old, I officially announced that I was leaving the church and I was renouncing Christianity, so to say.
Wow.
Yeah,
Did I just
big
hear
deal.
a bird in the background?
Yeah, that is a hadida. It's a type of ibis.
That's right. Okay, guys. So I know you're talking about all this stuff and it's like
Yeah, go
super
for it.
fascinating, but I just have to add, I'm just fascinated that you are sitting in what is now, you're heading into summer, right?
Yes, we're like
You're in spring,
into
heading
deep
into
spring
summer.
now. Mm-hmm.
So, and you and I have known each other for a couple of years, and it's just so funny to me that when we talk, we're in completely different seasons. Like, and that I'm hearing like an ibis. How do you say it? How do you pronounce it?
Yeah, ibis.
Ibis.
So yeah,
Like just outside of your window. It's just like a normal thing, not a dirty pigeon or like
we've got them too, you know.
I know, but I'm just like, it's so fascinating to me because it's so the other shore. Anyway, so continue.
Yeah. Where were we?
I don't know. We were
track.
so at 18 you renounced the the church.
Oh, that was a big
and your
deal.
family is religious, was conservative.
Yeah. Look, a lot of South Africa, if the audience is mostly states-based, would kind of associate the conservative level with the Bible Belt. That's kind of the level of our conservative Christian communities. It's not as intense anymore. It's still there. You know, people have their diversity, so it's going to be there. But I was very fortunate not to be ostracized by family. My parents were very liberal in a sense. I guess they knew that I was a bit strange, and and granted me the freedom to be myself and to explore. But you know, I guess I can whisper this. My mother still wishes that I would come back to the church someday. That I will become this great apostle of the church. And I'm like, sure, you know, yes, mom, yes, of course. Anything, if it helps you, then so be it. But yeah, it was a big transition for myself, because it's not like I jumped into this abyss with a knowing what the abyss was holding for me. I came from within a fixed Christian perspective, so I had to challenge myself to take a transition into the abyss, knowing that I would gamble with my soul, so to say. But I took the leap because I felt that if God is love, then I would be catched and held. And it was kind of, but I also felt I had to take the chance to move on, and not to be stuck in a certain system that doesn't work with my disposition, with my state of mind, with my asking. My questions led me to ask more, which I wasn't being, that weren't being answered. So that's what took me into my seeking. And I won't go on too long about it, but eventually I came across a Buddhist temple, and I got really intrigued by the philosophy and the practice. And this was my first introduction into Buddhism, and that was the specific tradition was like a Pure Land Buddhist Chan tradition. Chan is the Chinese for Zen, Zen being the Japanese. And so I still consider myself today as a Pure Land Chan practitioner. I've also been introduced and practiced in certain Tibetan Buddhist traditions, which is better not to discuss too much, because there's a reason why certain practices and it's not even the practice, it's just why we don't talk about it openly, is to kind of withhold your intention. And in Buddhist practice and philosophy, we refer to bodhicitta, which is the intentional mind of compassion and wisdom to benefit all beings. And that is what I hold in my heart. So as I looked for a means to kind of manifest this, I was planning on becoming a monk, but I was still a loyal son, and I would get my degree because it was asked of me. So you're not going to be a monk. Yes.
The parental
you first
pressure.
get your degree. You have to get a career. You know, this is all. My dad called it glorified hoboism. That's right. And
wow.
yeah, I figured, okay, I stayed at the temple for a while, and I volunteered, and I was still engaged with the practice, and my teacher was there. But I opted to study further. So I delved into psychology and philosophy and religious studies, everything that kind of led me in a parallel direction with this monastic contemplative life. Yeah. But the calling reminded me to kind of find my roots. And that's where I was looking for something that was a bit more Western. And again, I was then reminded of my school experience of looking into the occult, esoteric traditions, like the Hermetic traditions, Order of the Golden Dawn, even Druidry, and there's a lot. But I couldn't really situate something. I wasn't resonating with the Kabbalistic magics, and I'm familiar with certain practices, but it just didn't speak to me. So there's a lot of interest and a lot of things that I can point to and say, well, that makes sense. But eventually I realized, like, maybe it's just better to stick with my heart practice and just find a so-called Western means to communicate this. And this is where the wizardry came in, because I was like, there was a point, I can't remember exactly when in history, but there was a point when I think I was reading through The Lord of the Rings, and and I was thinking about Gandalf and him sitting in this library and studying these books, and then how did he like learn his skill. And I thought, wow, wouldn't it be cool if there were a place that you could study to become a Gandalf, right? I know Terry Pratchett's got his, what's it called, the Unseen University, I think that's what it's called, where like it's this place where wizards congregate to study and influence Discworld. But yeah, I wasn't reading Terry Pratchett at that time, but I felt the calling of a Gandalf, the gray wizard.
Yeah.
Even the shade of gray really resonated with me, because it wasn't really this or that.
Yeah.
I know there are a lot of occultists who argue like there's no real gray. You're either white or black, or you're a left-hand path practitioner or a right-hand path practitioner. But drawing on my Buddhist understanding of the middle way, it's like, this is how I interpret it, is fine-tuning either sides to better situate your manifestation and disposition in this life. So it is very much for me a middle way, a middle hand path. And yeah, and then I found the gray school of wizardry, which was this, like, just a search for where could I study some stuff on wizardry. So yeah, I was a student at the Gray School of Wizardry. It's an online college for basically for anyone who's interested in studying wizardry. And it's not closed to traditions and denominations. It's open to anyone from every tradition. And it's almost like, it is very much like based on the Hogwarts type of picture of a school of wizardry, but the so-called professors or teachers are practitioners from different traditions, magical traditions, and they're bringing their wisdom and understanding. So that's a route, right? And I took that route, but it doesn't mean that now I kind of took this path as a ceremonial magician, or what can I say, like a Setian or a Martinist magician, or like it wasn't redirecting me in a specific tradition. Mm-hmm. It only really equipped me with what I felt I needed to kind of take my intention and make it to manifest it, or to, in a way, to justify what I'm already doing is wizardry. And yeah, so a wizard is there's so many different interpretations, but its root word is found in the wise one, somebody who embodies wisdom, and the way they manifest that wisdom can be through magical means. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's, to be a solitary practitioner just means that I'm not really or necessarily bound to any specific group, society, or order. And yeah, I continually learn, and it's going to be a continuous learning experience.
Yeah. It's almost like you've woven this traditional education, or multiple traditional educations, in with this sort of complete non-traditional education, which is, I don't know. It's just like, I don't know anyone else who, I don't know anyone else really? Personally who, I'm sure there's people out there who do similar things, because I think, and you know this a little bit, but I've always had trouble reconciling that sort of higher education pursuit. And how do I put it? Like, oh, you're not capable of doing this unless you have this degree or this degree. And a lot of that for me just comes from difficulty within the educational system and just kind of how things were taught. For me, it was more about feeling. I love oral tradition. I love really taking something internally and sort of processing it through me. But I wasn't ever able to do that if I had a teacher who wasn't really interested in what they were teaching. So the only teachers that I found inspiring were usually the teachers who loved what they were teaching. So it's, I think, I have like an unreasonable disdain for education in general, or at least the systems of education.
Academia,
academia.
And what it's become.
I mean, there's also, I mean, if I'm completely honest, there's this, it was always very difficult for me as well. I mean, synthesizing and reading information and synthesizing it and then regurgitating it back out is just not easy for me. It's not the way my brain can take in information. My brain takes in information a little bit differently. And I have to, I mean, ADD. it's a little.
But I mean, I tend to also take a more of a disliking or just a critical view on academia, in the sense of seeing it as this industrial ivory tower that's just churning information and knowledge. It's not altogether that. This is just a generalized view. But in terms of the numbers of seeing people go through and producing intellectual property, and it's kind of like, I see this ivory tower and these steam chimneys of like intellectual like farts blasting into the atmosphere, it's a lot of that. I recollect being constantly
I see what you mean.
Constantly disappointed by the professors, especially like the philosophy professors, who were really sharp and interesting, sometimes, not all the time. But what really like got me wondering is the lack of philosophical living. Like everyone could speak what's the word, spit some word, but they couldn't like display a life lived philosophically. And I felt like that was really missing, this exemplification of what we're studying. The same when I was studying religious studies, the same thing. Like I asked constantly, why aren't we sitting in meditation? Why aren't we observing silence or really like practicing what we're studying? And it's just like, you're spending time behind your desk and reading, flipping through papers. Look, I'm not arguing against the need to study, because it refines our understanding, but we also need to engage in experiential learning where we are engaged in, otherwise it's just it's research about wisdom. But where's the wisdom in research?
That feels like a masculine feminine balance.
Oh yeah.
Like
I mean, the ivory tower is phallic.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah, it's very much
white
an
too.
ego tower.
Very white.
Oh, it's very white.
So
very
white.
phallic.
It's ivory. No, but yeah, I mean, like it's that balance. It's that yin yang, that sort of breathing life into something, actually. Yeah. Gosh, I wonder when that's going to happen, when that stuff is going to really integrate.
Well, if anything, we can see, and I'm sure you guys can see in the States, like education is at a state of criticality. It's like it urgently needs an overhaul. Because we see it on the ground, we see it in the tops of the towers. Something's got to give, because people are just not fulfilled in their learning experience. And it's also like financially, it's milking everyone. I mean, I don't know the numbers exactly, but from what I recollect, the debt that has been created by higher education is crippling certain economies, microeconomies, I don't know, macroeconomy as well. So, like that's where the two don't really correlate with me. The two being like, we've got this knowledge economy and the industry of like skill set output, but we've really forgotten like the roots. And this is where the call to wisdom comes up. If we give like life to those roots again, And it's the same if we look at our ecological crisis. You could really like look at the two in the same lens.
Yeah.
Give like root and heart back to what wisdom means, and you'll see renewed growth from the ground up again.
Yeah.
But that is a challenge.
Yeah.
And I'm still not entirely sure who to address and where to approach. But
who can I call? What manager can I call to complain? No, I'm just kidding.
The managers don't want to listen.
Managers.
I mean, maybe some of them listen, but it all just kind of like fizzles out.
I just feel like it's just imbalanced. And I always talk about feminine and masculine, and not in a way to say that like, oh, we don't need masculine anymore. We obviously do. We have to have both. And I really feel like if we start valuing those sort of feminine values of space, contemplation, creation, all of those kinds of things, if we can really, as a world, just place value on them, place importance on them, then maybe we can really integrate it a little bit and balance it out a little bit more. But it doesn't seem like anyone really wants to help bring up that sort of divine feminine, even if it's internally. We still live in a world that just rejects it or beats it.
Do you think
up.
so? Like,
I do. I mean, I consider, especially ecology and environment, I mean, I consider the earth is that feminine, and look at what we've done to the planet. Look at,
although we are seeing a lot more of the feminine voice taking stand and calling to the feminine to take the reins of learning in a way.
I hope so. I think there's still a need to fill a certain place that I don't know that people feel brave enough to kind of create new structures around it. I think it's still fitting fitting feminine in a masculine sort of environment, at least seen through that. And almost like you were talking about that sort of Christian lens. It's like seeing it through a sort of masculine patriarchal lens. It's very difficult to kind of input feminine within that sort of wounded masculine that has sort of grown very violent. And I don't just mean physical violence. I mean violence in language, violence in sort of, like just shut up, go to work every day and, don't feel anything. Like just use your brain. Very mental space instead of balancing heart and mental. I don't know if I'm making any sense right now. But.
It's a contested and vulnerable topic, because in a sense we're dealing with both wounded masculine and feminine dynamics, right? Yeah. I mean, we could say that the feminine is an organic that wants to heal the so-called, I'm just throwing out an interpretation, the wounded structures of the masculine. In a same sense, we can flip that and say that the masculine wants to hold a space so that the feminine can grow, like to be organic. And the masculine can also be organic, whereas the feminine can be structured. So there's a lot of ways for us to create like an interpretation around what the masculine and feminine are towards each other and in themselves. So maybe what is needed is to be very clear about what the masculine and feminine are, why we are, what's the reason that we are engaging in this topic, and then how can we go about it. And like, if I take a step back and talking about this Johnny Appleseed project, it's just something that came up when I saw the image of this, the story of Johnny Appleseed going across the country and planting apple trees. We can integrate the symbolic reference of the masculine and feminine in that, in the planting of a tree, in the organic nature, in collecting communities to contemplate or, like meditate together, and then to each one then takes their own seed and have this rhizomatic spreading in their own direction, and creating their own like colonies of trees and so on. So there's so many ways for us to unpack these archetypes.
I almost feel like the archetypes need to just be investigated individually.
Mm-hmm.
And I do feel like, because when we bring feminism or even like complaints about patriarchy to the forefront, when we focus on that, it doesn't work. It's because it's there's so many projected sort of ideas on those two main, I guess, categories. Everyone has their own way of relating to it. But for me, I believe that it's an internal job. It's an internal job to heal your own internal masculine as well as your own internal feminine. However, I don't think that it's the job of the feminine to heal the masculine. I think it's the job of the feminine to heal the wounded feminine. And I think it's the job of the masculine to heal itself. I think it's, as long as there's space that can be, I think each sort of side can create space for the other to heal. But internally is, I think, the first place we can start it. So meaning like, okay, you don't have to exactly say that this is going to be a feminine way of teaching or whatever, but you can understand what that means to you. And you can find that balance so that when you're kind of teaching or creating that project, which sounds amazing, by the way. Oh,
thank you.
If you need any help, let me know. It's like you are already integrating it, whether people know it or not, because I think it's so triggering to talk about these sort of masculine, feminine. A lot of people don't really understand what that means. It's really just these two complementary energies, but that we've completely devalued one of them. Men shouldn't be having feelings, things like that. I mean, I don't know that we've talked about it extensively, but I know growing up in the culture that you did, patriarchal, masculine.
South Africans' history would be typically considered, or stereotypically considered, a patriarchal society, a nationalist society. Like the church was a state church, the political party was a state party, and it had in a sense an iron fist. I grew up, I was born in the 80s, and I was fairly oblivious. Like, I wasn't like critically engaged at a young age, but I kind of saw what was going on, and I didn't quite understand. And a lot of the difficulty was segregated. I mean, even that was segregated from you. Not just the people, but the information, what's going on in the country was kept aside from us as youth. So we grew up thinking everything was rosy and peachy, and like very privileged, I guess. I had a privileged upbringing, and I'm also appreciative of my parents for placing me in a school that was not expected. It was frowned upon initially, because I was growing up as an Afrikaner, Christian Afrikaner. The idea was to situate me in a Afrikaans speaking school that had like certain Christian moral values. Instead, and this was in my own doing as well. As a kid, I was placed in a Catholic school because I was intrigued by the men wearing brown dresses. That was like a thing I asked my parents, "Mommy, I want to go to the school with men with the brown dresses."
Wow.
And these were Christian brothers, or like a monastic order. And so being placed in a private school gave me an opportunity to grow up with diverse people from the different ethnic ethnicities, different cultures, and also just getting an alternative view on like my worldview, that it wasn't just this fixed way. So yes, I mean, that in a sense was also like a breaking of the patriarchal mold, although in a way that school also had its patriarchy, right?
Yeah.
Like it's hard to find a place where the patriarchy wasn't so invested, and
Yeah.
but I have to then admit that the mothers in the family had such a significant role. They really held the families together. And I think I don't know where I saw this. I don't know if you posted something on Instagram or but this image of the Egyptian empress holding the pharaoh, or the male representation, and then the caption just states how the women at the time were regarded higher than the men, and that when the men elevated to a degree of hierarchy, they would then receive a headdress that represents the length of the like female hair. I don't know how true this is. Like this, anything that's just been put out there could be like falsified or fake news.
Yeah.
But I like the idea. I like the intrigue of that, and I kind of hope it's true. But yeah, like the female figures really held our families together.
Yeah.
And
what about like expectations of like what it means to be a
yeah.
man? Like how did you deal with
generally
that?
or like in South Africa?
In South Africa.
A general idea is that a man needs to be a provider. He cannot really show emotion, needs to be hands-on, needs to protect his woman, his wife,
Yeah.
and like be an engineer. This is like, maybe it's a bit of a stereotype, but an engineer of the fate of the family. South Africa has such a complex history, especially for the masculine, or the male rather. Because there was a lot of expectation, and this is there are different ways to look at it when we're pointing out what it means to be a white man in South Africa,
of course,
and then what it means to be a black man in South Africa. I cannot speak on the black man's behalf, but I know there are similarities in expectations, which is kind of ironic. Like there has been so much conflict between these two peoples. It's so weird to see it as the polarizing of the black and white, and there's this conflict. And then of course we don't just have black and white. There's so much diversity. But having grown up also during the transition where South Africa then entered into a new democracy, or as some would say, its first democracy, with the inauguration of President Nelson Mandela and that whole transition, it was so intriguing for me to grow up through a bit of the past and then into the present and what the future holds, not being too like set in my ways, as a lot of the old guard still are, to an extent, set in the ways of what it means to be this type of man. And we still today have so many complexities. We still see the influence of, like, what can I call it, toxic masculinity played out in society, South African society. But that said, there's also so much good that has come through, like an opening up and allowing to speak the emotion that has been suppressed for so long.
That's great.
Yeah. I mean, as a society, and I think internationally as well, we are so fixated on the negative news, because it's something to complain about.
Yeah.
But there's plenty of good, like we've come a long way, still have a long way to go. The world and all the countries, they all have their complexities and their difficulties, and we still do. But if we don't have these things, we don't have something really to work on.
Yeah.
So I can, in a weird way, say I am grateful that there are these difficulties, so that there's something that is evidently available to work with.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. I love that. This is all super fascinating to me. I've always been interested in different cultures. It's just, I don't know if it's because I was so completely bored by Long Island, New York, my whole childhood. So it was just, I'm always fascinated by how people experience the world through their particular country or culture.
Mm.
I want.
When you say the world, do you mean the States?
Obviously, the only world. But I guess maybe it doesn't really matter because, I mean, most people are experiencing different realities, even if the three other people in my house are experiencing a different reality, even though we live in the same house. But
I think it's a mistake to disregard the relative reality. And if we're just fixating on the ultimate reality and say, well, we all experience reality through an unconditioned awareness, then we're kind of fooling ourselves, because the relative it's rooted, it grows from within this ultimate reality. So the relative is this, how do let's call it the weather, or the reality that we're on different hemispheres of the planet, affect the way we communicate. And communication is such an intriguing aspect in itself. Like I've had nightmares where I forgot how to talk, and I had to re-teach myself, like just this thing of language leaving my mouth, and you're hearing it and you're understanding it. The intrigue of like shaping sound to create a symbolic, like
discourse.
A discourse, yeah. We're sharing data, and it becomes information, and then there's knowledge that wraps around this weaving of this information, and then it settles into understanding, and it's very intriguing. But yeah, the relative of maybe you're going through summer and I'm going through winter, and the way the seasons affect our mood, our
energy levels.
Yeah.
Sun, like just the sun exposure.
Yeah. I mean, there's certain parts in the north of the world that just have a constant winter, or the sun. I think in Alaska there's just,
or even
a
like
lot
Iceland.
of sun.
They don't have like nighttime. Right? It's so weird. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about I think your website it's still being finalized, but people, if they want to go online, they can search you just by name. I know you've got a lot of stuff online.
Just search me. Yeah, they can search me. I don't like, they won't find anything intriguing. It's nothing that's worthy of Pinterest. But I mean, if people want to contact me, they can do some work and search for me. Like we make things way too easy.
We do, right? God, you guys, why are you so needy? No, I'm gonna. Well, I'm gonna leave your. Well, obviously, we've got your name and the spelling of your name, so people can search you up online, and also maybe find your Instagram. And some videos. You've got some YouTube videos as well.
Yeah, not that much. I'm really holding out for this website, and because I want it to be right. But I also don't want to wait too long, so I'm also holding myself accountable for this.
Yes, this is Count on us to hold you accountable.
Oh, yeah. Now it's out there, right? So I'm gonna get messages. When is this gonna be launched? Yeah.
Yeah, I know, right? So eagerly awaiting your teachings and you know, it's really I'm so happy to have met you and really kind of like seen, and for me, an example of a male perspective, a male embodied perspective of spirituality, of sort of heart-based practices, and you know, and I feel like it's very important for me to know you as well as like other people, you know, men who can kind of represent that part of this sort of big new agey spiritual field, you know, that we sort of dance in and around, but also kind of coming from that academic perspective, which I respect, but I personally can't move forward with, I guess. But it's always fun to hear you talk about it. It's like I like learning about it through you. So it's really, and it's very enjoyable. This
there is heart and tradition to be found in everything, and even the profane is sacred if your view is clear, if your view is, you know, set in a wisdom intention, then you
and if your heart
that.
is clear too.
Yeah, if your heart is clear too.
Yeah.
Heart mind. And you know, I beat on academia a lot, but I've also learned a lot from it. So there's something to recognize in that. And I do feel like there's a lot that can be cultivated and developed for it to return to its root intention, which goes back to antiquity. But it can never be quite the same. It just takes like some radical thinkers and feelers to
thank you. Thanks for including me.
Oh yeah, of course, very much inclusive, to make this, you know, to make, I don't know, to cultivate conditions for new growth, new learning, new interaction, and weaving, you know, like a good weaving makes a strong fabric. And yeah, it's a great symbol to use, I think, for a lot of things. But yeah,
that's definitely going into cover art. Some kind of weave. Thank you so much for talking and for coming on the show. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and I'd love for you to come back at some point and talk about, you know, this project. I think it's really exciting.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a really great privilege to be on your show. It is a great privilege, and I do hope that another opportunity arises for it to continue. Hopefully by then I'll have my website up and running, and that would be like, that's my mandala for my wizardry, right? That's what it is, right? So then people can like rest easy and like not be stressed out about, you know, biting their nails. When is this going to happen? I kid. Nobody even knows that I exist.
So now I am older than my mother and father when they had their daughter. Now what does that say about me? I